Nadine Hanwell on the Beatrix Potter Trail. When Beatrix Potter was 75, she wrote, "My brother and I were born in London because my father was a lawyer there. But our descent, our interest and our joy was in the North Country. And happily, for both of them, they lived in the North for the latter part of their lives. Bertram in Scotland and Beatrix in her beloved Lake District. It was in the blood. Both sides of their family were from Lancashire, Unitarians, and both families had made their fortunes from the cotton trade. Beatrix's grandfather, Edmund, had a very successful calico printing. He had a difficult start, and he was a good employer. He knew the advantage of education, and for his workers he had built a library and a reading room, and for the child workers a schoolroom, which they shared with children from other local employers. When life had been difficult in the early days, he'd become aware of the print tax, and this had awakened his interest in politics, and he later went on to become the Liberal MP for Carlisle. He had 7 children, and it was thought that Rupert, Beatrix's father, would take over the business. But Rupert had other ideas. He'd done well in the Unitarian College, and he had his heart set on becoming a lawyer, and this is what took him to London. At 25, he qualified and was called to the bar. At 31, he married Helen Leach. She was the daughter of John Leach, a successful cotton trader in Stalybridge, Manchester. He died before they married, and he left her a large legacy. For the first 3 years of their life, they lived in Upper Harley Street. But when Helen was expecting their first child, Beatrix, they moved to number 2 Bolton Gardens in Kensington. This is where Beatrix lived for the next 47 years of her life, not always happily, and Rupert until his death nearly 48 years later. But they had strong ties to Manchester, to the Unitarian Church, friends and family. When Beatrix was 19, she wrote about a visit there. Very cold at Manchester, but on the whole fine. I enjoyed myself very much. And she wrote pages about a visit to a favourite aunt. Went with my mother to lunch at Aunt Sydney's. Only my aunt and cousin Jessie were there. My aunt, who seemed in good health, received us very cordially. We began lunch at once. She sat in an old-fashioned high green wooden armchair, and for the first 10 minutes said very little, occupying herself with her dinner and a glass of ale. As to me, I could hardly take my eyes off her. Such is my respect. I felt she was listening to every word. Now and then she made a shrewd remark, tempered with her uniform kindliness. Now, a lot of gossiping took place that afternoon about the trials and tribulations of the family, and they also talked about the desolate journey they'd had to see the old mill in Stalybridge, and on a lighter note, about paint and powder. We were interrupted about 3:20 to my intense disgust by the arrival of the carriage. When my aunt had kissed me, she said, still holding my hands, "My dear, when shall I see you in Manchester again? You must be sure and come. You have a bright face. Goodbye." Beatrix wrote this in her diary, in her private code, her innermost thoughts. She once thought, "Oh, nobody else will see this." Little did she know. We know that Beatrix painted beautifully, but she also had a wonderful way with words, and I'd like you to listen to this. It's a description of her art. "I will to my best power describe Aunt Sydney, as she jerks her rocking chair a little up and a little down, sitting bolt upright before the fire. She has shrewd, quiet grey eyes, which seem to look through one. Twice I saw them observantly fixed on me. Aunt Sydney must be nearly 80 and is rather lame, but mentally in perfect vigour. I never saw a woman, except my grandmother, with such a powerful mind, or any one man or woman to equal her storytelling. Now, this was praise indeed, because Beatrix adored her grandmother and used to sit for hours listening to her stories. Her voice is clear and pleasant. She speaks rather low, distinctly, with a slight touch of Lancashire, which, however, is more apparent in the modulation than in pronunciation. The sense of humour is evident in everything she says. But how seldom do we see humour joined with so tender a sympathy with the sadder and graver side of life. She is of middling height, erect, broad, not exactly fat. As she sits in her chair, she certainly could not see her feet. Her breast seems to come straight out under her chin. Her eyes twinkle, and she looks in the fire as she speaks. Her face is quietly pleasing, from expression. I should doubt she were ever handsome, but it is character that makes the face. I never saw a kinder, sweeter old lady. And that kind, sweet old lady was my great-great-grandmother.